So good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Legally Everywhere with Child. What we legally everywhere. We looking into everything. When I say we looking into everything, child, we looking into everything. I am currently studying criminal law at the University of London, and one thing I have been learning that I thought was interesting is that like lawyers are trained to organize information differently than like I would say we are, right? They're trained to organize information differently than we are. So tonight, um, how do I want to put this? I wanted to adapt some of the things that I'm learning in this class, right? So we're not here to solve a case, right? Because it's too early to be doing any of that. Much too early. We're not going to determine if people are guilty or not. We're not even going to do that. We're going to put this through, as you know how I am, we're going to put this through a framework. We're going to put this through a framework. And I'm so excited to share this with you guys. I was playing around with it on my own, just kind of looking on social media. And I have been interacting with, as some would call, evidence, right? Things that have been shared, things are in the public domain. And I've been interacting with them in a way that I wanted to ask the question, right? The question being, how would a defense attorney interact with this information? Like, how would prosecution potentially interact with this information? And that's how I've been viewing it. And I was like, okay, I'm just kind of just doing this for an application purpose. But then I did a live earlier today, and someone said, R.I.P. Nolan. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take that as affirmation. I'm going to take that as affirmation that I should share with my people what I've been working with as far as like the framework. And so here we are, right? Here we are yet again today, because normally I only want to do one live a day, but here we are, live number 2. So we're going to practice the thinking part. The I'm going to invite you pretty much into the experience. I wanted to set the tone, right? I wanted to invite you into thinking like a law student, potentially thinking like a lawyer. Like, once again, we talked about 2 different tracks. Like, how might a prosecutor look at this information? How might a criminal defense attorney, like, look at this information? Because keep in mind, this is an ongoing investigation. This is ongoing. So we're just looking at it through one way of looking through a legal framework. Also, like I said, y'all know how I am about getting to these receipts. I found something from someone who is an engineer, an audio engineer expert that was online. They were so kind as to share their professional subject matter expertise with people by way of Facebook and also TikTok. So I extracted that information. That will be a 4-minute, almost 5-minute clip that I will tag and index in a certain portion of the framework, which will be towards the end, because we got to lay that foundation down. So I just wanted to share it with you guys as we move through. And once again, we get to practice these skills. Another piece I wanted to add before we jump into it, right? Keep in mind it's an ongoing investigation. Keep in mind that we have loss of life. We want to have a lot of empathy in how we talk about this. We're talking about a young person. We're talking about potentially actually young people, right? Someone who comes from a social work background in particular, I just want to make sure that the empathy piece is in place too. Sometimes these conversations can be a little cold, a little methodical, in a sense that we're not necessarily honoring that piece all the time because we're focused on getting those specific prescriptive pieces put in place, let's say puzzle pieces in place. So before like we even begin looking at my framework, I just want to share that people have to come before the procedure when it comes to stuff on my platform, right? I can't speak for everybody's platform and how they want to approach the information, but behind every investigation, behind every story, behind every like major situation, there is a real person. You know what I'm saying? This is a real family that's really going through it. And to a degree, multiple families, right? But in particular, Nolan's family, that is going through it. There is a real community that is supporting that young man's family. that is going through it, because of loss of life, the way he lost his life, all the surrounding information, details. So there will be emotional pieces that people feel in the community, right? And I don't ever want to lose sight of that piece, because we know that this type of thing does affect people, right? It's so many pieces to this puzzle. Um, we want to keep that in mind, but also keep in mind that we're specifically talking about the legal concepts and the legal topics. So I'm gonna do that as respectfully as I can, because once again, I feel like there's lots of raw emotions, right? There's lots of raw emotions. So if someone's like, hey, I just feel like it's a little too much going on with regards, I'm not going into anything I feel like it should be um triggering. I but I don't know people's emotional states right now. I don't know how close someone is who this could be coming across their feet. Um, so once again, I'm always going to tell people, engage in self-care, make sure you're good. If it's too much, step away and come back when you're comfortable. I will always put this on replay. I will always leave these on lives available on my page, as long as nothing, inappropriate or anything happened during my live. Wouldn't be on my end if it did. But if I felt like something was not cool, I just wouldn't put that up after the fact. But I make sure I keep a safe space on purpose. I try to have trauma-informed approaches on purpose, so that it is something that people can consume. It is something we all can learn from. I'm very big on learning out loud. So with that being said, laying that kind of foundation, right? This is Legally Everywhere page, which we legally everywhere, looking into everything. This is my channel. Like, subscribe, comment all throughout the process. If I see questions and things as I'm moving through the framework I'm about to show you, I'll try my best to answer in real time. But if I'm in the middle of a particular section, just give me a couple moments. You know what I'm saying? Because we doing this together, but I still want to make sure I'm hitting all the pieces I need to hit on. If that makes sense, we good to go. Okay. So this is the cover that you all are probably currently seeing on. Okay, let's make sure that's hitting. Where is my pen? Can y'all see? So we have a couple of pieces here. We have board 1, which is, so essentially I'll break it down a little bit more. Let me see if standing is helpful. Is that helpful to you guys? That does not appear to be helpful. I'm still trying to navigate this little piece here with y'all, but I'll just use my finger, y'all. So like I said, I'll try to do more of these where we use like current events and then we can do some application things. But just keep in mind that every investigation is a real person's real families, is a real community. So when we are in the comments and things like that, we just never know who could be popping in, how close they are associated with people. So just be very kind in your comments and things that you're saying, because once again, this is an open investigation. This is an open case. This is very new, right? As we can see, the timeline of events is very recent, right? So last reported contact with family was July 3rd. On July 4th, typically, Independence Day, Horn Island outing with friends, reported missing later that day, didn't return home. On the 5th, it was a search efforts that began. That was multiple agencies. I'm going to get closer. That was involved with that process. July 6th, he was found, right? And then the investigation continues from there. So when you see the green mark on here, those are things that are verified. When we're coming at things from a legal perspective, there is a difference between verified, reported, and unknown. And we have to be cognizant of that piece, right? From a personal perspective, like a lot of people have a lot of viewpoints, right, on some of the pieces, right? And you're like, hey, some other things that should be marked as verified. Well, according to what they have, those things may not always be verified. They might have just been reported. So I put check marks on things that they said were, quote, were verified. And things that were reported, which is obviously that this investigation is ongoing, is something I marked as yellow. There are quite a few unknown things I'll also list out. But I try to keep it clean also in the way I put this up. I do have other information that I'll add out as we talk. Because once again, I want y'all in the chats talk with me. Let's study together, right? But it's really important once again that we have the timeline and we know what pieces was verified, right? Those were the verified pieces. I'm gonna go to the advocacy portion later. So I want us to look at issue spotting. That's a significant piece that comes, when you're studying law, you want to be able to issue spot, right? So we went to go look at the criminal law, and we looked at act reus, right? The act, mens rea, the mentality behind it, right? The causation, potential offenses like that, what they could be charged with, potential defenses, things that could reduce or remove criminal liability, right? Burden of proof. In a criminal sense, that would more so fall on the prosecution side, but kind of looking as far as the act, right? That can be further explored, right? What actual acts were taken. It's too early to pretty much say the mens rea part, like what was the mentality behind, the action that was taken. And keep in mind, we talk about acts where that has to be a prohibited act, an act that is, considered illegal, has by the law, right? Causation, that's something that can be explored, right, as far as conversations go. Offenses, right? If it's a pending investigation, we don't really have anything definitive right there. So if we don't have the offense itself, right, the charge, because prosecution has to determine if they want to actually, go ahead and go forward with charges, it's too early to determine what defenses they could use, what legal, or maybe legally recognized defenses that could be used, right? It's too early right now to say. And then, so then, as far as burden of proof, there's some teachable pieces that I have been learning, even in this process, right, that I'm going to kind of walk us through. But issue spotting really isn't even saying that's someone's guilty or not, right? We not in that piece yet. We're just spotting the issues. We're identifying essentially what law would require for certain things to stick. And that's the part that gets interesting. So I'm going to actually pop out of this and show you my sketchbook that I have relevant to just understanding the criminal law, just because you want to see that framework. It directly connects to this section, but it explains it a little bit more just so you have that for your viewing pleasure. I'm going to step really out real quick and look at the chat. I saw some movement. It said hello legally everywhere and to everyone. Okay, well, guess what? Thank you so much, Motley, for giving some engagement in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and pull up this. And keep in mind, I do have a treat for us. There is a subject matter expert, not self-reported, okay? So what? Not verified. But we do have someone who shared their expertise. I do have that clip. We're going to play that once we get to board 4 or 5. We are currently functioning in board 2. Okay. And I see something in the chat that said there's 1 hour and 23 minutes not accounted for. Can you give me some clarification on that piece and we'll move through it? Y'all know I'm always trying to get into the tea. So as I wait to see that response, this is the board that I made for my criminal law, like my first page. Y'all know I tend to do sketchbooks from my notes because that's just how my brain is oriented. I told y'all I'm a visual. Y'all don't be believing me, but listen. I am a very visual person. So this is typically how my stuff looks. I have multiple pages for each major section of what I had to study, but this is that first, let's call it like a master map, right? So just to kind of put the definition also there, you see that 60-second understanding in the corner, right? Criminal law determines when the state may punish an individual for conduct that harms society. Every offense follows the same framework. Identify the prohibited conduct, the acts reus, right? Determine the required mental state, which is the mens rea, and decide whether a successful defense prevents criminal liability. So that's pretty much what this page is right here. We kind of look, I told you, since it's an atlas structure, that's what this is right here, right? Your foundations is criminal liability, acts reus, right? The mens rea, burden of proof, standard of proof, right? So when we look at burden of proof, that's the prosecution's burden. Standard of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. Also want to put on that, when you're dealing with general civil, just as a side note, I was looking like, oh, so interesting. When you're looking at general civil situations, it was interesting. I was just kind of paying attention to language. It's like, you more than likely did that. So when you look at criminal, like, better yet, civil, is like, you more than likely did said thing, right? When you're looking at criminal law, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And when we talk about that beyond a reasonable doubt, that burden of proof kind of falls on in that area. So beyond a reasonable doubt would be that standard of proof. And then you have the burden of proof falls on the prosecution, like that burden is there, so to speak. Now, when we kind of go in and move, just so y'all can see, sorry if y'all couldn't see the foundation section before, the offenses. If you think I spelled that wrong, I actually didn't. Because I'm studying at London, I have to use, at least understand the way that they write certain things. So I've been programming my brain to see it a certain way. So that is UK English. You'll see that the same is true with defenses. Because especially it's a specific term called recognized defense, as opposed to just saying I'm going to flip it to look like what's familiar with me. I try to keep most of the nouns that they give me exactly as they have them. So if you see that there's a difference, just know that that's actually what that is. I did not misspell that. It is a learning curve though, so prepare yourself. So as far as the offenses, like the actual act, right, or the potential charge, the prohibited act, you have like homicide, assault, theft, fraud, criminal damage, public order, inculate offenses like attempted conspiracy, all of that, right? And then you have what those things what we call like recognized defenses, right? Recognized defenses are the things that will either reduce or remove the criminal liability. So self-defense, consent, duress, necessity, insanity, automatism, mistake, right? So criminal liability. State may punish only when all elements are proven, right? And if there are things that could reduce or eliminate that liability, that's how that kind of maps that way. Hopefully that movement makes sense. So what are the 3 questions every criminal lawyer asks, right? What happens? What was the defendant thinking? Is there a successful defense? Does that green map up to y'all? Okay. Hopefully y'all can see. Green, what happened? This is the foundations, right? Criminal liability, acts reus, mens rea, burden of proof, standard of proof. What was the defendant thinking? Mens rea, right? The acts rea, the mens rea. Is there a successful defense? Okay, so like what was the actual offense? Is there a successful defense? Do they have the criminal liability, relevant to that prohibited act? So I did give myself, like, because y'all know how I feel about comparative law, I do have the comparative between like UK and the United States. And then a couple exam related things. I even have a Legally Everywhere framework piece that I mapped out just so that y'all could have that as we move through this framework. I have like a 1 sentence or 2, like every criminal law problem begins with the same 3 questions. What happened? What was the defendant thinking? And is there a successful legal defense? Does that make sense so far? Because I ain't want to slam y'all in there and y'all like, girl, give me a seatbelt, you know? Okay. So I see a little bit of movement in the chat. Once again, good evening to you all. Thank you for being on this live. Yes, we are here. We are here. Okay. So just to make sure that foundation was put pretty good, now we go back and look at board 2, right? Make sure y'all can see. We're looking at the criminal law issues spotting, right? So we looked at the acts rea, the act, right? That's something that can be explored more, like what actually happened. We know that there was an autopsy that was done, and then we also know that there was an independent autopsy done. We know that Colin Kaepernick, a previous NFL player, he funded another one happening, right? So when we talk about community supports, solid work, right? And there was some determinations that were made there. We'll also have, like I said, audio clipping, well, actually a video audio clipping from an audio engineer that will be present in board 5. We are currently in board, well, this will be in board 5, right? We're currently in board 2, moving into board 3, but just kind of showing you that other one gives you a little bit of framework and kind of understanding. Sometimes we be listening to these lawyers online and they're like, well, I don't know. And you like, what you mean you don't know? You know? And I wanted to share some of these nuggets I've been coming across to make that a little bit more comfortable to kind of understand, because I feel like that really does surprise people when we're kind of listening to these legal experts and everyone's kind of saying, you know, I don't know. You're like, well, you the expert. We expect you to know. Give us an answer. Give it to us quick. Give it to us nice and concise. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. As we're moving through things that feel like they would be definitive, right? Because laws what's so prescriptive, so specific, isn't always a quick answer like you would want, especially when we're still in the process of this being an open investigation. There's still collection of information happening at this time, right? So I'll show you on here where we are in the process. Didn't I put that on this one? Okay, yeah. On board 6, we'll talk about as far as the criminal procedural tracker, like where we are in that process. Better yet, make sure we can see this on the board. So you see, we'll just quickly jump to 6 just so you can see for visual purposes, and we'll reaffirm later. The incident itself, right? Investigation. This is our current stage. This is where we at. You know how you go to the mall and like, we are here. This is where we are at. We're in investigation, right? Next stage is evidence review. The next stage would be prosecutorial review, right? Then you go to court proceedings. Then you would go to charging decisions, right? That offense, right? And you get potential like grand jury, right? Actually, I threw that out of sequence. I'm going to come back and show it to you. Because technically it could go grand jury to charging decision, then to the court proceedings. So you got your 2 separate pathways. But go from incident, boom, like that. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to come back in and reset it up so don't you worry. But I just want you to kind of see, when we're talking about the process, we at the investigation. The incident just happened. We're in the investigation portion. So some of these things, what is too early to say, and it needs further exploration. Okay? So then we kind of move to an interesting part, right? We move to a very interesting part. I found it really interesting as I was digging. I come to find out that he is of direct bloodline to Ida Wells, a civil rights leader, and an activist, someone who spoke very strongly against lynching, has some strong connections to the NAACP. That doesn't necessarily mean directly it means anything or causation, but it's just very interesting, once again, when you just think about the pieces that are in the puzzle, because we did see a big, let's say, movement or posture by the NAACP, and that makes sense once you understand the family's, let's say, connection, right, to that organization. So when we're talking about people, strategic actors, if you think about the Legally Everywhere framework that I have generally on the channel, family advocacy, right? The family's been seeking answers, asking for transparency from the department to release certain information that it seemed like maybe there wasn't as forthcoming at the initial stages. But keep in mind, this is what's still very early in the process. This event happened at the beginning of this month. At the beginning, last reported contact with the family was July 3rd. Today is the 28th. If it's your loved one, 25 days is far too long, right? Far too long for when you want to answer in your heart. But when we talk about legal processes, so the family advocacy is saying they're seeking answers, they're looking for transparency and accountability. And I think that's a fair question. That's a fair question for anyone to ask, regardless if they were of kin to them, but especially when it's your family, it's your child, it's your loved one. Of course, fair question. Community impact, right? The public. We've been weighing in, right? When they didn't pull Nancy Grace out. Y'all know the lady that says, bank on it. I first off, when I was younger, I just love that lady, right? She don't play about children. Now, if I remember correctly, he was like a high schooler. I don't know if he's exactly 18 or just 17 going, but she don't play about children, okay? One thing she's not going to play about. So she was able to put some social pressure. We're talking about public, right? We know that Colin Kaepernick said, what's going on there? And he said, no, we want an independent autopsy, right? So public pressure and attention to say, oh, no, we watching that. We're not going to play about that. No, we want some answers. I don't like the way that sounds. Sound a little funny, right? So we have community engagement. What? Public awareness, right? There are people who are powerful, who are leveraging their social media platforms. People who are leveraging their social capital to say, we're going to bring some attention to this, right? Boom. And in various forms of communities, right? Let's see. Like I said, once again, the civil rights content, we have Al Sharpton over there. Now, that's one thing. Now, if it's something going on with civil rights, he going to pop up in there. That, you want to say like that's like Grand Unk, but I feel like almost rude to say, so he's going to say Unk, right? But a civil rights leader who has been around for quite some time, right? I remember being a young child and we used to have to role play and do certain things and do acting, and everyone had their little part. I ended up being Rosa Parks. I think it's just because I wear glasses, but that's a whole nother thing when I had to do my little part. But I distinctly remember that him being such an influential person historically, the role that he has had, being a young child, and people happening to enact certain parts of our history when it came to that time, right? So him being present, him leveraging his impact and power to bring some attention. He has been very present with this family, right? And did I mention, I believe I did at the beginning, he is also a direct lineage to Ida B. Wells, who once again is a civil rights activist. She had a very strong background with regards to anti-lynching advocacy writings, right? And things of that nature. So just kind of keeping in mind some of that, once again, because of the way this has been presented, it falls under the civil rights elements because of the way that it's been structured, or at least the packaging, right? Um, so once again, because we don't have a lot of definitive information, we just kind of keep that in mind. But keep in mind, it has been packaged a certain kind of way, so we know that, if that makes sense. Okay. So the human impact. The human impact I always like to talk about is we just gotta handle stuff with empathy. That's somebody's baby. That is somebody's child. That their life was cut too short. There's, like I said, there's a human piece to all of this. That's somebody's baby that's no longer here, who had to have that type of passing that way, right? Um, and that's devastating for that family and that community, right? That is very devastating for that family and that community, and it's very triggering for lots of people to see certain things. It makes people question what how would you put that quality of life in the sense of some